So greetings, everyone. My name is Stuart Nelson. I'm the Vice President at the Institute for Spirituality and Health in the Texas Medical Center. We're so grateful for all of your presence here this evening. I think we have a great panel lined up. And my duties this evening are to go over a little bit about the Institute, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping, and then to introduce our facilitator and the visionary behind the event, Lily Weiland. So first of all, welcome to a program sponsored by the Institute for Spirituality and Health at the Texas Medical Center. The Institute has been around for 65 years, and the entire time we've been dedicated to the concept that humans are spiritual beings and that healthcare should reflect that reality. Our mission is to enhance well-being by exploring the relationship between spirituality and health, which we do through educational initiatives, research programs, as well as some direct service projects. You can find more out about the Institute at our website, spiritualityandhealth.org. We have a constantly changing roster of programs, and so we look forward to seeing you again. If this is your first time, welcome, and if you've been before, then welcome back. We're glad to have you back. Just a couple of things about Zoom. I'm sure we're all experts on Zoom right now, but I would be remiss not to say that this evening we will not be unmuting anybody. You can unmute yourself, but we request that you do not do that. Lily will explain more when the time comes, but we will be doing a question and answer by chat. So you can find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And submit your questions that way when the time comes. Of course, if the speakers during their remarks want verbal feedback, then they're more than welcome to request that and solicit that as they wish. Also, I just wanted to point out that for those of you who do not know, the upper right-hand corner of your screen has a view button, and you can toggle between gallery view, where you see everyone, and speaker view, where just the speaker appears on your screen. So FYI, for those of you who aren't familiar with that feature, it is there for your use. So here we are at Meaning Making at the End of Life, a program visioned and organized by Lily Weiland. Ms. Weiland is currently a sophomore at Rice University, where she is working towards a degree in philosophy with a minor in biochemistry. She aspires to go into medicine, she thinks, someday. If for many, many interests, if that's the path that they lead. I will say that Lily came to us last summer of 2019, just before a practicum project that she engaged with in the fall. And we have interns and practicum students come through the Institute every semester and most summers. And it's not every time that we get to work with someone as bright, as brilliant, as thorough, as well-read, as just delightful as Lily. So we're really, really grateful that she is affiliated with the Institute and that we were able, in a small way, to contribute to her path. I feel like whatever she has in store in her future in the coming years of college, as well as what lies beyond, that she will be she'll be met with resounding success. It's really been a delight to work with you, Lily, and I just really appreciate you. She has been engaged with the medical humanities throughout her tenure at Rice University, and she completed the practicum in medical humanities during the 2019-2020 academic year. We were looking forward to having this event in the spring, but a certain pandemic got in the way of that, and so we're happy that it's finally happening now. That's enough from me. Really appreciate your attention, and I'll turn it over now to Ms. Lily Weiland.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for your kind remarks. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So now to address the audience, hello, and thank you so much for attending today's panel on Meaning Making at the End of Life, addressing the patient's community and palliative team. Today, we are joined by an excellent group of panelists, including a physician, a scholar, and a chaplain, to address the pain, suffering, and isolation experienced at the end of life. First today, we are joined by Dr. Marcia Brennan. Dr. Brennan is a Carolyn and Fred McManus Professor of Humanities at Rice University, as well as Professor of Art History and Religious Studies. Further, Dr. Brennan works as the artist in residence in the Department of Palliative Care and Rehabilitation Medicine at MD Anderson, with works ranging from the topics of comparative mysticism and modern contemporary art history to museum studies and spirituality, Dr. Brennan shows a versatile breadth of expertise in the many books that she's published, including works such as Life at the End of Life, Finding Words Beyond Words. Next today, we will hear from Dr. Marvin Delgado-Guay. Dr. Delgado is an internist and associate professor at MD Anderson in the Department of Palliative, Rehabilitation, and Integrative Medicine, specifically in the Division of Cancer Medicine. He's completed fellowships in geriatric medicine and in symptom control and palliative care from Harvard Medical School and MD Anderson, respectively. His works range from examining symptom distress in advanced cancer patients to publications on physical and spiritual issues in advanced cancer patients with their caregivers. In his work on spiritual distress, Dr. Delgado points to the importance of spirituality as being how we seek and express meaning, such that when people feel spiritual pain at the end of life, the first steps to take will involve a patient's community showing presence and compassion, and hence forming what he terms the collective soul. And lastly, before the Q&A portion of today, we will listen to Dr. Tim Van Dyvendyk. Dr. Van Dyvendyk is a chaplain and a counselor, and he's received his Bachelor of Science from Baylor University, his Doctor of Ministry and Master of Divinity degrees from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He served as adjunct faculty at the Houston Baptist University School of Nursing and the UT Health Science Center School of Nursing. And additionally, he took on the role of Director of Chaplaincy Services and Education at the Memorial Hermann Health System. In his writing, particularly his work, The Unwanted Gift of Grief, Dr. Van Dyvendyk grapples with the uses and misuses of faith and religion, the process of family coming together for meaning, and many other topics concerning spirituality and the end of life. We're so grateful to have these panelists join us today. As Stuart said, this event has been a long time coming, as it was originally scheduled to happen in April, but was postponed in all of the uncertainty. But despite the delay, I'm so excited to share with you and hearing from these panelists on what is bound to be an important and thought-provoking topic. So in reviewing all of the panelists' work today to prepare for my remarks, I searched for commonalities, and despite the very different approaches, I found that in many ways, our panelists today pointed to common themes. Most notably, each of their works points to ideas of growth at the end of life. Sometimes the idea of growth at the end of life is shown through deliberate life reviews, such as in chaplaincy practices, and sometimes it's achieved through more artistic or investigative means. But either way, we get to important ideas of growth. As I sat with these works and perspectives, I realized that growth is possible precisely because patients and their communities are facing difficulties. The process is complex and messy and convoluted, often looping around to return right where we started. But growth at the end of life occurs not in spite of, but because of these struggles and pain. So this begs the question, how does this growth occur, and why would we want to engage such a messy and painful process? To address the how, I'll point mostly to meaning making. Meaning serves as the primary process through which we experience spiritual growth, because through it, we start to understand our lives better and reflect upon our experiences. In Dr. Delgado's work, Developing a Healing Environment, he discusses how a collective group can come together to grow as a whole and help each other grow individually. He writes, for many individuals living with a life-threatening illness, this moment in their life might be a call to spiritual growth. Such a call to action is one inspired by meaning of deep personal relevance, a level of personalization which follows into Dr. Van Dyvendyk's work. Dr. Van Dyvendyk's phrase, the wilderness of grief, referring to the end of life and grieving process, suggests a journey which causes or even forces growth. This journey is highly individual and requires people to, as he writes, see through things toward transcendence and deeper meaning. So instead of resisting the pain of grief, Dr. Van Dyvendyk shows a way to grow through the grief by venturing further into the wilderness. And further, in Dr. Brennan's work, we can see this common theme of growth even in the title of her books, such as Life at the End of Life. When we work with words beyond words during Life at the End of Life, to borrow her phrases, we acknowledge moving beyond our typical states and venturing into more unknown, undefinable, and unrepresentable fields of emotion and knowledge. This unrepresentable liminal field strikes a similar chord with Dr. Van Dyvendyk's Wilderness of Grief and Dr. Delgado's Call to Action and Collective Soul. All of these ideas draw upon more innate senses of understanding, which are liminal and unrepresentable. As Dr. Brennan quotes Atul Gawande in her work, Life at the End of Life, for human beings, life is meaningful because it is a story. And in all good stories, we find growth. It is through stories and relationships that explore both the highs of optimism and the lows of despair that we can grasp this liminal understanding of meaning which comes with the end of life. Each author here today shows in their work that the growth a person experiences at the end of life does not tend to occur in isolation. People at the end of life need relationships, not only with their own spirituality, but also they need links to family, friends, healthcare providers, spiritual or faith leaders, and so on. Yet it is all too true that people at the end of life face isolation from their communities and from their own emotions. And this isolation becomes especially pronounced and difficult during this pandemic due to the restricted visitation rules. And that makes our discussion today that much more important. Usually we don't talk about death or dying much in our everyday lives. The subject seems too heavy when it feels that we have more pressing things to worry about. But recently, people are recognizing this importance and are attempting to cope with the overwhelming thoughts of death accompanying this pandemic. And as people's attempts to cope increase, the aggressive normalization of death parasitically increases as well. Though we're finally talking about dying more, conversations all too often center around a nihilistic perspective, and the sense that some people will flee to a perspective that feels safe, believing that it was simply this person's time to die. And when we turn to such perspectives, we are essentially saying that it is okay to do nothing, that it is okay to let someone die alone and without having a chance to embrace the fullness of that person's life. In this way, without giving regard and emphasis to the importance of meaning and growth at the end of life, we treat people as if they are already dead. So even though we have opened the lid on this conversation, all too many people go about the discussion in an unhealthy way. So that brings me to our task. To answer my earlier question, why would we want to engage in such a messy and painful process such as growth at the end of life or meaning making? The answer is we need to examine these processes in order to grapple with the surge of nihilism that would otherwise lead to the devaluing of lives at the end of life. And we do this by turning the conversation away from the unproductive questions and instead focusing on the important questions. What gives us meaning throughout our lives, and how can we continue to grow at the end of our lives? Or even to focus more narrowly, how can caregivers and community members aid in the meaning-making process? What practices can patients use to better understand the meaning of their lives? And even further, how can we navigate optimism and despair towards meaning-making? Reframing this conversation to an examination of life and meaning will let us investigate in a healthier way. And with that, I invite the panelists to now share with us how they believe we can have these conversations about meaning and spirituality at the end of life. Our panelists will have many different approaches to answering these questions, as you will all hear shortly. And first, we will have Dr. Brennan speak as a brief reintroduction. Dr. Brennan is a professor of art history and religious studies at Rice University, as well as the artist in residence at MD Anderson's Palliative Care Department. We're very fortunate to have her speak with us today. So take it away, Dr. Brennan.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you so much for organizing this panel. As I have to say too, you've just done everything so beautifully and the topic could not be more important. So big hand to Lily. Okay. So much has changed indeed since when you first invited us all to speak and to gather in this way and where we find ourselves now. So before getting into my topic, I'm just going to take a moment to address where we are now versus where we were when I first wrote this talk and what life looked like then. Okay, so I will say that, as we all know, COVID-19 has been incredibly disruptive in many ways. Not the least of which is because it radically changes the paradigm in which our culture discusses and perceives the end of life. Before it had hit, a lot of the conversation was focused on the management of chronic illness, right, the treatment of disease, and then also addressing the frailty of old age. And so the conversation had unfolded, difficult as it was, but in such a way as to build in some time for consideration, some time for planning, a certain kind of chronology. And then comes the great disruptor, COVID-19, which, as we all know, can be traumatic and immediate. And so truncating a conversation that's already so difficult to have culturally. And so what's difficult about that is not only the disruption that's occurring right in the most immediate way, but also the cultural disruptions in the conversation and the conversations and how they've become inflected by this moment. So what I'll just say about this progression of COVID-19 And the trauma that's associated with this pandemic indeed does have to do with isolation of patients and family members who find themselves potentially disconnected because of the highly transmissible nature of the disease. So people are not able to be physically present often when their loved ones pass away in medically isolated, clinically quarantined critical care settings. In addition to that, traditional grief and mourning structures, collective gatherings and religious rituals are also disrupted or diminished in this age of social distancing. So on many levels, right, it's a very difficult moment. On a personal level, I have not been able to get back to the campus at MD Anderson since mid-March. And so I am greatly looking forward to the day when that's possible. So the stories I'm going to be sharing with you tonight predate this. I've had a few remote visits with patients actually over the telephone over the summer, and I've done remote work with phase 1 clinical trial patients through an oncologist who's referred people to me. And I'm in conversation with another academic center about doing what I do remotely. But this is all a work in progress. Okay, so as Lily has indicated, for 11 years, I have served as a literary artist in residence in the Department of Palliative Care and Rehabilitation Medicine at MD Anderson. I am not a visual artist. I do not draw with patients. I do not produce visual artworks. I attend people at the bedside. My work, when I'm able to be there, takes place on the acute palliative care inpatient unit. Dr. Delgado-Guay can comment on this. I think that there is no such thing as sicker than being on the acute palliative care inpatient unit at a place like MD Anderson. We are looking at oftentimes extremely, extremely serious, difficult, and critical conditions. Okay. Over 11 years, it's been my privilege to work with thousands of people, and I've been present literally at scores and scores of passings. When I go in, I come to the bedside and I just ask the patient, I introduce myself and I just ask the person about the images that are meaningful for them. And as they start to speak, I do not bring any technology into the room, and that too is another paradox with our own technologically mediated moment. I bring in my own little notebook and a 29-cent Bic pen, El Cheapo. The whole point of this is to diminish and deconstruct the hierarchical boundaries and barriers between myself and the other person. We're there as two human beings sitting and visiting. And so we talk. I'm always aware of shortness of breath and if one side or another is better, where equipment and medical devices are located. So I try to make the person as comfortable as possible so that the visit can be as human and normalized as possible. I ask them about the images that are important for them. And as they start to speak, I just write down their words verbatim in my own little notebook. And throughout the course of the visit, a story will emerge, and I'll put the lines together in the story together in lines that resemble free-form poetry. And then when there's a natural point intuitively when we've reached this narrative, I'll say to the person, can I tell you the story I heard you tell me? And they will say yes, and I'll invite them to make any additions or corrections that they want. And when they hear the power of their own words, they will often be moved to tears. It's just truly extraordinary. And so one of the great lessons from this is that people are immensely beautiful, but there needs to be a way to witness this and document this so that this presence can be heard and seen. So much of life, and especially life at the end of life, is evanescent. When I was able to do the work at bedside, I would then, when we had the narrative the way they wanted it, I would inscribe it in a handmade paper journal. This is awful on Zoom, but you get a little bit of a sense. So there's a plastic covering over it, and then it's handmade mulberry paper on top, and then blank cream-colored pages. And so it's fragile, but it's tangible, just like palliative care. It's fragile and it's tangible. And once again, it's the paradox of great strength and great delicacy being coextensive. That's the privilege and the culture of the incredible unit that I've had the unbelievable honor of working with and being part of. Okay, so having said all of that, I will say that in this age of COVID, even though I can no longer sit bedside, what can we still do? When people are facing the end of life, you can still ask some of the questions that I ask. You can ask the person, if there's an image in your mind of something important for you, what would that be? You can listen respectfully as they answer. You can really be attentive, and it's that gift of the presence and the attention that is, again, so remarkable. The words can be taken down and documented. There can be this witnessing, and there can be this preservation of presence. And at the end, we can talk more about that if you like. But having said all of that, I'm going to give you a couple of the questions that this work raises for me, and then I'm going to go straight into the stories, and that will be my presentation. Okay, So while doing this work for all of these years, incredible questions come to me. They may sound scholarly, they may sound humanistic. We can talk about these, but some of these questions include: how do images and narratives provide tools for people to imagine something more? When facing the end of life, what do we get to keep and what do we get to take? How can aesthetics serve as a vehicle for giving people access to visionary and transformational states of consciousness? How does art fuse the material and the spiritual worlds so that there is a transformed vision of reality? And, not least of all, how do we see, know, understand, and find language for the part of humanity that encompasses and transcends the forms of the physical body? I'm going to repeat that last one. This is Professor Brennan. She's coming forward now. Okay, I'll have her sit down, and Marcia, the nice lady, will return in just a moment, but Professor Brennan is still on the stage here. So this last question, because this is a mouthful, but really there's a metaphysical but also a very practical and existential component to this, so I'm going to repeat this. How do we see, know, understand, and find language for the part of humanity that both encompasses, includes, and transcends the forms of the physical body? So as you can hear, this has to do with how we go about understanding the relationships between physics and metaphysics. And this is a leitmotif oftentimes within palliative care and in life at the end of life. Okay, having said all that, I'm going to let the patients speak for themselves. I have 3 stories to share. Lily, I hope this doesn't go, I'll be as brief and as consolidated as I can be, but the patient voices are so important. I would like for them to be heard. Okay, the first story I'm going to tell is from an older man who suffered from an extremely aggressive form of a renal cell carcinoma. When I entered the room that day, there was a palpable sense of sadness and fear because this was a genetic cancer. He had seen other relatives pass from this, and this was just a very difficult situation that this man found himself in as he sat all alone in his hospital bed. So again, I knocked, I introduced myself, I asked him to share his images, and while I knew this would be difficult and we would indeed be dealing with some despair, I was listening attentively to hear and wait for and hear that transformational element, and then it comes. Okay, so his narrative artwork, it's called The Circular Porch, Going All the Way Around. And these are all his words, not my words, these are his words. My image now would be to die in a peaceful manner. That's the opposite of where I seem to be headed. When you're a kid, you're naive. There's a lot that's never spoken about. There's a lot of cancer in my family. As you get older, you become more aware of things. I'm from Iowa originally, and I remember Sunday afternoons, getting into the family car and driving up to the hills. Those were rough mud roads, and we'd have to get out and push the car. Eventually, we'd get up there to the top of the hill, to a big old house that had a big white porch going all the way around. I'm thinking of this now because in life, you go through all these crazy things, like going through the day, pushing the car, getting stuck in the mud, and laughing and getting mad. And then you finally get there, and it's just a different world. It's your own little world, and nothing affects you badly. You're just there, and it's totally good. You can see a different world up there from the circular porch as you walk all the way around. Just beautiful, right? Just beautiful. It's all there. It's all there, from suffering right through that transformational element. And it's all his words. And to be in that condition and in that moment and to produce something like that, right? You can just imagine how humbling and what an honor it is to be present. Okay. Story number 2. This is called The Two Sides of the Tapestry. This story came a day when I was attending a family where the man in the bed was passing away, and he was no longer responsive. He was and Dr. Delgado-Guay can talk about this, he was in a stage of actively dying. And so this encompasses various stages of non-responsiveness. He was very close. He would ultimately pass away later that evening. This occurred maybe around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I sat for over an hour with the family, the wife and the adult son, and we produced an artwork that was really a tribute to him. So, you know, can you please tell me something wonderful about your husband? How did you meet? How many years are you married? Tell me something great about your her dad. Okay, so we did that. And then as I was turning to go, the woman was so sweet and wonderful. She said to me, and when I hear things like this, my ears perk up because I always know something incredible is going to be coming. And of course it comes. She said, I don't know why, but I feel like I have to tell you this story. So that's just music to my ears when I hear these words. So I say, thank you so much. And we sit down again and I take out my notebook. And here is what was in her mind, okay, at that incredible transitional juncture of her life and her husband's life, the two sides of the tapestry. These are all her words, all her words. She said, when I was a child, my mother would take me to visit a cloistered Carmelite convent in West Texas. The nuns did beautiful sewing and they made absolutely wonderful lace garments. One time I was in the sitting room. The nuns were showing my mother their handwork. There was a large tapestry on the wall. On one side was a beautiful bright scene of a man and a woman and a castle and animals. But when I looked at the backside, I wanted to throw up because it was just a mass of tangled threads in very bright garish colors. It didn't look like anything but confusion. As a child, I would stand right at the edge of the thick tapestry. I would look at the curtain flat, and then I would look around at the back for as long as I could stand it, until it made me feel sick. Then I would turn around to the front and see the beautiful picture. Our life here on earth may appear through the glass darkly, like the backside of the tapestry, where we don't see the patterns, and we can't make sense of it. This is like looking at my husband lying there in his bed, dying of cancer. But God sees in the light, and he can see the pattern. Even as a child, I knew that the tapestry was speaking to me, and I knew it was God. And what else can one say? All we can do is bow our head and say thank you, and I love this, and I love this experience. Thank you so much for sharing this. Notice how every time after I finish speaking, after every story, there's a shift in the atmosphere. Even here on Zoom, we can still feel it. There still is a collective soul, there still is a collective presence, and there's a shift. Maybe in Q&A, we can talk about what you all feel in the shift after each story. And that brings me to my final story. Another day, I visited with a family that was from Mexico, and they told an extraordinary story about their family traditions. The patient in the bed was an older man who suffered, again, from an extremely aggressive form of cancer, and he had been admitted to the palliative care unit earlier that day for pain control. The man only spoke Spanish, so it was his adult daughter at his bedside who served as translator, and together they produced a very powerful narrative. And this one is going to fall under the heading of a near-death experience, NDE narrative, or pre-death visitation kind of narrative. So it's another sort of conversation here. Their story is called The Black Bird. Here is what the man said. My dad has always been a truck driver. All his life, it's been his job and his passion, and it's a family heritage. All of his brothers were truck drivers. It's in the family. He and his brothers would all get together and talk about things. One of the relatives would see something bad on the road, and they would alert my dad and tell him to be careful. The truck my dad drove was called the Black Bird. It was named after my uncle, who was my dad's older brother. The Black Bird is a dark, massive bird with bright orange wings. It's a wild bird, and it flies very fast. They named the truck after my dad's brother, who was also dark and very fast, just like the bird. His brother died of cancer, and so did many of the male relatives. It's the same type of cancer that my father has. That is also the family heritage. That is also part of their tradition. My dad has no spiritual fears. He is in peace with God. Yesterday morning, my dad told me that he saw his brothers and other male relatives in the room. He was asleep, and they were touching him, and he woke up. When he woke up, he asked my mom, "What are all these people doing in the room?" And my mom was like, "What people?" My dad said his brothers were touching him as he woke up, and that's how he knows he's ready to go to heaven. Again, a very, very beautiful story. So what I will just say in conclusion, just as the boundaries that separate and connect the realms of the dying, the dead, and the living can become so fluid in these end-of-life narratives, expanded conceptions of humanity and humanism, of life and death and life again, emerge within these transcendent images. As such, these subtle living presences can help people recognize the part of themselves that cannot die. And when we see this, ordinary life appears anew before our very eyes, and this can serve as a life review for the living. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brennan. That was absolutely wonderful, and we so appreciate hearing those stories. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Martin Delgado-Guay. Dr. Delgado, as a brief reintroduction, is an internist and associate professor at MD Anderson with a range of published works on spiritual distress and advanced cancer patients and their caregivers. And thank you so much, Dr. Delgado, for being here with us today. Feel free to go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have a presentation that I'm going to share with you, and I hope that I'm going to stay between the 10-12 minutes, okay? Do you see it? Okay, perfect. As we always care for people who are with advanced and terminal illness, and the main role of palliative care is to embrace that human spirit and obviously all the emotional and the physical aspects, not only the patient, but also the caregiver, the family members. So I believe that it's important that we always take in consideration, as a clinicians, that emotional and spiritual aspect of the suffering. I don't have anything to disclose. We will try to describe very quickly in this short time some of the aspects about how palliative care can relieve the psychological and spiritual suffering in patients with advanced and terminal illness, some of the healthcare outcomes regarding to the spirituality and spiritual distress, and some of the few interventions that you have started hearing also with our other speakers. So I'm going to start with one patient that I have while I was on call in the palliative care unit. Is Mr. HD, 68-year-old with advanced malignancy, status post multiple treatments, and he had a progressive illness with progressive deterioration in his performance status. And he was widowed. His wife actually died in the same palliative care unit from cancer a couple of years ago. He was living with one of his daughters. He had 2 daughters in total. He has been treated with for depression with 2 antidepressants during the last 5 years, actually. And he had expressed severe pain, severe dyspnea, fatigue, and poor general well-being, and feeling with depressed mood, no suicidal at all. I was on call and I sat down next to him, and I look at him and I said, "So how are you holding up with everything that is happening to you? How's your spirit doing?" He looked at me and he said, "The pain is horrible and I can't stand it." I just remained silent and I let him continue. "I don't feel at peace. I can't stand myself. I don't know, I guess I will die soon. And I don't know what's coming. What is after this? I'm fearful." He continues to talk, and then suddenly he says, "My soul is hurting." We use to evaluate symptoms the ESSAS, the Edmonton Symptom Assessment Scale, that has 12 elements. One of them is spiritual pain. That is pain deep in your soul that is not physical. 0 is nothing, 10 is the worst spiritual pain, and he rated 8/10 since his admission. So I said to him, "And tell me a little bit more about that pain that you feel in your soul." "I have seen my soul is bleeding." Now just imagine that image, as Dr. Brennan was mentioned, that something is bleeding, just the blood coming down, and how that is affecting the quality of life and the meaning of that patient that is suffering and dying. So after some moments of silence, and we continue, let him express also, "What can we do to help you to relieve that pain in your soul, that bleeding in your soul?" He said, I don't know, I guess pray for me. I don't know, maybe confess, change, baptize me. I don't know. I need forgiveness. So it was very interesting the way that he opened himself to that suffering that he was expressing, and how I was able to help him, and just to, with the presence, with that compassion presence, and without even putting any medications on board. Actually, he was in a very high dose of pain medication with some anxiolytics also. And after the interventions, we were able to start decreasing the amount of pain medication that he was having. We did some life review, identified what was helping him in difficult moments, helping him to reconnect with his higher power and reconnect with his family. To the point that was saying, I'm just grateful to have them with me. The family, the two daughters were involved also in that healing process. I always say it is important to continue to have that faith that you have, because that might give you some strength to help you to walk through all these moments, and also give you the strength and peace to accept things whenever you're not able to change them. We work as a team, and that's what I call the collective soul, because each member of our team have their own spirituality, their own way to lead, to deal with life. But whenever we come together to work together for the well-being of the patients, we become one single collective soul. So we help him, we pray for his peace. The counselor and the social worker and the chaplain were involved. Even his pastor was contacted. So after a week to stay with us, his symptoms improved. He was able to go back to his home and die peacefully a couple of weeks later. And it was very peaceful and healing process that he had during that time together with his family. What we have to remember is that patients with advanced illness, many times they have advanced age, or even very young people, multiple comorbidities, several physical symptoms, pain, fatigue, nausea, shortness of breath, sexual distress, cognitive impairment, many times delirium, and also all the aspects of emotional distress, anxiety, depression, financial distress, all the spiritual and existential issues, and the family and caregiver distress in the sense of sociocultural issues also. We have to remember it's not only cancer patients, but also patients with congestive heart failure, with pulmonary disease, with chronic kidney disease, with dementia and AIDS, might have also several symptoms in different prevalence, but it's very severe and affect their quality of life. Studies also slowly started showing a little bit more about the presence of spiritual distress in all these patients. What we have to remember is that suffering is not a question which demands an answer. It is not a problem which requires a solution. It is a mystery which demands a presence. And that is what we have to remember. Because people might be preoccupied for whatever is coming or whatever happened in the past. They might feel disconnected from themselves, from the others, from the phenomenal world, and ultimate meaning. They might have that crisis of meaning. They might feel in the existential vacuum, inability to find peace. Or simply, they need to be in control. And the lack of control is one of the major things, and major distressful areas that definitely creates a lot of distress with our patients. People also start losing their dependency. They feel meaningless. They feel like they are a burden to others. They feel hopelessness. They lost the social role functioning. I'm not the mother. I'm not the father. I'm not the lover that I used to be. But now look at me. What am I doing? Might feel emotionally relevant for sure. What we have to take in consideration is that many needs exist. Obviously, in terms of information, they might not understand exactly what is happening with themselves in terms of prognosis and how severe is their illness, treatment, advanced care plans, the home care, multiple physical needs, in terms of non-controlled pain, fatigue, shortness of breath, decreased appetite, loss of weight, nausea, delirium, decrease of function, and obviously all the aspects of emotional distress, the existential distress and the spiritual distress, hope, meaning, lack of dignity, or having issues with the faith in the religion, and also all the social needs that can be affected in terms of family caregivers, relationship, living situation, and financial issues. And if we see all together, definitely we are talking about a break in their relationship with themselves, with the others, with what gives them meaning in their life. So definitely living with a life-threatening illness is an assault on the whole person, not only the physical, psychological, social, and spiritual, and also sexual aspects. The patients go from the experience of suffering and anguish, and our main goal is to try to improve that quality of life and healing, to become an experience of wholeness and integrity. And what we have to remember is that as we talk about spirituality, is that aspect of humanity that refers the way that individuals seek and express their meaning and purpose, and the way that they experience their connectedness with the moment, with themselves, to others, with the nature, with the significant or sacred, anything that gives them meaning. And that's what we look, especially whenever we explore those aspects in life. People actually want to hear about that, want to get involved with that. In a study that we did using the Go Wish game cards, is that we ask them we give them 36 cards and ask them to pick the 10 most important wishes that they would like to accomplish at the end of their life. The most interesting thing is that among the 100 patients, the two top were to be at peace with God and to be able to pray. And then comes with to have my family with me, to be free of pain, not being a burden to my family, to trust my doctor, to keep my sense of humor, to say goodbye to important people in my life, to have my family prepared for my death, and to be able to help others. This is spirituality. This is all relationships that people are really telling us, yes, let's do it, let's work, I'm open to that. And we have to be aware that people want that help in overcoming fears, finding that hope, finding that meaning in life, and also to help them to find some spiritual resources, and just simply having somebody to talk about the meaning of their life and the meaning of their death. They just simply want to be treated as a whole person with sensitivity. Ideally, definitely it's important to identify any negative religious coping strategies, feeling a religious apathy, that is, this is a God punishment, or anger at God, or having being self-neglect or conflict with the church dogma. All those aspects definitely can trigger also thinking about the spiritual pain, that is the loss of being in relationship, because it gets affected all the essential and existential dimension of the person. Absolutely, that as we become more aware of death, more having more loss of relationship, loss of self, loss of purpose, and loss of control, and having less affirming and transcending purpose in our life and less control in our life, definitely we continue to suffer and become that spiritual pain. We did a study with 100 cancer patients in our clinic, and we found more than 40% of these patients were experiencing spiritual pain. Most of them, even that most of our population consider themselves a spiritual or religious person, people with a spiritual pain might have a little bit less religiosity or spirituality, and also might have less aspects of positive religious coping strategies, and at the same time might have less quality of life in the spiritual aspects. So all those aspects are important to consider with our patients. We did it also in our palliative care clinic, in the first 282 consults that we did using the ISAS FS, the financial and the spiritual pain. Again, 44% of patients had the spiritual pain, and people with the spiritual pain had worse pain, physical pain, worse anxiety and depression, worse drowsiness, worse well-being, and definitely worse financial distress also. What we have to remember is that suffering is experienced by persons, not merely by bodies. Whenever we have threatening that the intact of the person as a complex social and psychosocial entity. Family also suffers, and we also have to be able to care for them. More than 50% of caregivers might experience spiritual pain. Why? Because obviously my family manage multiple caregiving tasks, including emotional tasks of preparing for the loss of the loved one. Poor communication might exist between the healthcare providers, and they might feel helpless, and might feel selfish many times regarding to their own needs, and they might get sicker later, and they might trigger thoughts of their own mortality. Kids also suffer, and that's another big topic also that we need to keep attention on that. How we can help them definitely is to try to boost keep that balance, a buffer against depression and hopelessness and desire for death in patients with advanced illness. And unfortunately, there is no many doses of spirituality or spiritual care that we can give. It's just simply the presence, the compassion, care that we provide. And there are several interventions that we can do. You know, I call the collective soul to bolster dignity, hope, and meaning, definitely to reduce that existential or spiritual distress. This is the collective soul. You know, we all have our own culture and spirituality, you know, all members of the team, all together to try to improve the quality of life of patients and family members. The most important thing is that always, independently of the stage of the patient in his illness, if it is suffering, we have to help them to feel in a healing environment, you know, in a culture of safety, culture of belonging, culture of empowerment, and also in culture of openness with involvement and inclusion. So we all work together to try to improve that connection, that soul connections that help us walking through all that. We are all part of the collective soul, integrated care with interdisciplinary approaches, definitely to provide that touch of hope and touch of love to decrease the suffering and improve the quality of life of our patients and caregiver in distress. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm open for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Delgado. And last to speak before the Q&A is Dr. Tim Van Dyvendyk. As a reintroduction, Dr. Van Dyvendyk is a chaplain and a counselor, as well as the former director of chaplaincy and education at the Memorial Hermann Health System. Thank you so much for being here today, and please go ahead.
How's that? Can you hear me? Okay, very good. I was saying thank you for the opportunity to be here and to hear these two very, very deep and effective presentations. Let me start with a family situation. Grandmother is dying. She's been in intensive care, and the family and the doctors have agreed that she go to a palliative care bed in the hospital so that the family could be near. That is the time in which I met the family. I met daughters, I met granddaughters, sons-in-laws. Her husband had died some years before, and this is what I saw. They invited me in, and I joined them as I sat and listened to them tell stories. They told stories of laughter, fun things that they did with their grandmother. They talked about her. They compared their stories and their histories. They cried. They cried openly with sadness as they talked about they will miss her. And she is coming in and out of awareness, hearing what we do not always know what they're hearing, but not responding to all that's being said, but occasionally a nod, occasionally a tear, occasionally a smile. I saw them expressing love. I saw them expressing gratitude. I saw them embracing. I saw them touching. I did not hear spiritual linguistics. I did not hear religious linguistics. What I saw was deeply, and what I observed was deeply spiritual. And deeply, you could see that God, or Yahweh, or Allah, or the Force, I guess, if you're Star Wars, the higher power was somehow amidst them to where they were transcending the grief by going into it and touching each other with love which indeed can bring meaning and transition us all into the labor and contractions of dying itself. To have our family, our physicians, our nurses, our chaplains, as midwives that walk with the patient through those labor and contractions, those tender labor and contractions, into the womb of eternal transition, transcendence, God, if you will, whatever words, faith you might give to those experiences. There are a number of dynamics I want to speak about that perhaps over the years I've seen interrupt this spiritual dialogue, this spiritual awareness, this meaning making that this family was doing together. One of the pathways and dynamics I often see that interrupts this connection, this meaning making, is the overuse of medical science and technology. That we live in a culture that many times sees that as the apple. If I can get the technological apple, if I can get the medical apple, then I will live forever. And in doing that, we oftentimes push too hard and too focused on the technological, the vent, the drugs, the intense treatment plans, to where the patient and the family are not able to come together to touch, to hold, to tear, to cry, to hope, to express gratitude and forgiveness. Truly, medical science and technology is a great gift. It has saved my daughter's life. We've committed our lives to this in terms of our professional lives, but at the same time, its overuse can interrupt. It can disconnect the patient, preventing them from tender communication, from expressions of gratitude for each other or for life, preventing them from expressing blessing to each other, and preventing them from expressing goodbyes. There's another dynamic pathway that I often see interrupting the end of life meaning making, and that is a tunnel, small view of faith that focuses primarily on miracle. These are patients, traditions, families, cultures, communities that have a profound faith that if we pray hard enough, if we hope hard enough, if we somehow offer to God our prayers of bring a miracle in this situation, we will be granted the miracle. I've seen this even to the point that families will not allow the physician to take the patient off ventilator or allow the physician to move them to a room because they've articulated they're waiting for God to do a miracle. First of all, I want you to hear me affirm God can do what God wants to do. And I have seen in my own life when medicine and technology and faith comes together, I have seen that miracle in the life of my own 26-year-old daughter, who was told she had 1% chance to live. So don't hear me as belittling faith. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes our faith becomes narrow to where we think we must have the perfect faith. Oftentimes traditions that focus primarily on miracle will believe that they can't weep openly because that's a lack of faith. Will believe that they can't talk about life and death or say goodbye or express our love to each other as a goodbye because they would not be keeping that perfect faith. And there's a belief that if I don't have perfect faith, I can't receive perfect miracle. This can often lead to distanciation. This can often lead to silence between family and community and patient. This can often lead to isolation for the patient, because the only way the community may be able to talk, or the minister or the loved ones may be able to talk, is through, we are praying for a miracle. Don't doubt, we will receive the miracle. Many times, as you know, if you work in healthcare, that particular way in which we look for the miracle may not be the result. And slowly they begin to see that death is coming. Often people move away because they really don't know how to embrace that the miracle may be saying yes to death when the sacred time comes. The miracle may be holding each other's hands, loving each other into eternal transcendence, or transition from this world to the next, or into meaning making and wholeness and closeness and companionship. What I'm trying to say is that these are two pathways, events in our culture that I have seen interrupt meaning making at the end of life. Right now, we're seeing COVID-19 really interrupting our way of bringing family together so that they can do their well-wishing, so that they can do their forgiving, so that they can do their I love you work, their grief work together, and help in that transition, that those contractions, those labor processes into eternal peace. Yes, we, and you, I know, use iPhones and face-to-face and iPads. We try to get dialogue going through these technologies, try to get the discussion going between patient and family if there's a consciousness and ability to talk, or at least help patient communicate their wishes, their love, even as the patient may be unconscious, because we know or believe that they can hear and they can know the care and love that comes to them. But COVID-19 has presented a pronounced interruption that we have to work with creatively in order to help families come together in these meaning moments. The other factor I want to just mention is that many families have not been able to talk about life and death, spirituality, faith, religion throughout their journey as a family, and may come to the end of life and not be able to talk openly about love and care and meaning and goodbyes as they have a loved one move into transition to eternal presence, a transcending presence. One of the writers I deeply admire is Dr. Ira Byock. He wrote Dying Well, but his little book, The Four Things That Matter Most, has made me think so many times in my ministry to people. As I listen to them, as I ask questions of their family, of their life, he talks about the four things that matter most is in life and in the dying process is to be able to say, I forgive you. Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you for loving me. At the heart of spirituality is love. What a powerful gift to give every day of our lives to our family, to our spouse, to our children. Those four important concepts, emotions, words. But to particularly be able to come to the end of life and have talking together as we resolve relationships, perhaps, through forgiveness, and express love for the years and love together. I would add the blessing, the importance of meaning making over this grandparent, for instance, blessing her grandchildren with love, with her care, with her acceptance. The grandchildren coming in and telling stories about grandmother and how wonderful she was. Thanking her for this experience or that experience, this love or this grace. I believe that blessing is at the heart of the potential for transcending meaninglessness, disconnection, along with what our Bach's speaking of, along with what our speakers tonight are addressing and speaking of, the importance of transcending that which we see and know and seeing through them, through what we know, what we see, to meaning, hope, love, and faith. I'll stop there and turn this back to Lily.
Thank you so much, Dr. Van Dyvendyk. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you to the rest of our speakers. With that, we've come to the portion of the program where we will take questions and engage in just a Q&A session with the panelists. Just as like some clarification, I will start us off with a few questions. And while our panelists are responding, feel free to type any questions you have into the chat, and I'll answer them as they're received. I'd also like to mention that if I see questions which are similar, I may combine them or skip over them if we've already addressed their themes. And as you write your questions in the chat, please indicate whether you're addressing them to a specific panelist or to the panel in general. So with that, I will get us started. Today, we've heard all of you discuss your approaches to meaning making at the end of life. And everything you've said today sounds wonderful and convincing and makes the idea of meaning and responding to suffering at the end of life sound like an appealing and natural choice. But let's really focus in on what the alternative is and what's motivated all of you to get into this line of research. When we say something is missing in medicine or healthcare without these approaches, we have to wonder what we are really saying about what happens when it is not there. So the question, what do we risk when we subordinate or neglect these perspectives you've shared as secondary to physical treatment or other physical symptoms? Anyone can start us off.
I can start. Oh, Marcia, if you want, go ahead.
I can go, and it's really interesting because I'm curious to see how our responses piggyback. So I'll just say that at Rice, I teach seminars on life at the end of life and also on the humanities of care. And so Lily, the questions that you're asking are front and center with questions that come up in medical anthropology. There's a particular doctor at Harvard in the School of Public Health, Eric Krakauer, who's done really amazing work, MD, PhD, and these kinds of issues. And so what I'll say is just that, yes, and to build on what Tim was talking about as well, that the technologies, and Atul Gawande as well, that technologies can be oppressive, and this whole idea of power, who has it and how it works at the end of life, the idea that the death is somehow the failure of the medical model, right? It's very interesting that there's too much to say about this, Lily. This is a whole topic for another symposium, but this whole conversation about again, how one locates the psychosocial and accrues respect to the human and the humanistic amidst a healthcare system that still is based in a biomedical model that values metrics and assessments and reproducibility and objectivity, perhaps sometimes over the subjectivity of the human being. And this, I will not do it, but I could give a lecture on Cartesian dualism and, up through the 17th century paradigms of mastery and their extension into our current age regarding the technology, which is fabulous and fantastic, but absolutely it is the case that there's the temptation to want to generalize and have a sense of empowerment around a battle model, right? We're at war with this disease that risks perhaps overlooking that there may be something greater in place than what medicine alone can offer. Marvin, do you want to pick up? I'm just really curious what you think.
Sure. I believe that is one of the major aspects is that we as a clinicians, we are not trained to deal with all this spiritual existential aspects, So even in the medical school, it's kind of hard to find specific topics, about it, or, classes that we can receive that part. Some schools integrate some of the humanities and all these aspects, but not really how to approach, spiritual distress or spiritual existential aspects, with the patients. So another important thing is that as we continue to grow, and this is not only in the medical school, but also in all the other schools, the clinical school, the nursing schools, is that many we focus in the medical aspects. If we don't pay attention to the psychosocial and the spiritual aspect, we lost a huge aspects of the life of the patients. It's just like, for example, I'm treating a patient with advanced illness and I'm treating pain, and I'm just giving opioids just to control the pain, but the patient continues to suffer, continues to have a lot of symptoms, using a lot of pain medications. And then the only thing that he needed to do is that we needed to explore a little bit more is that suffering that he's gonna die, that he's, having that existential aspects. If I don't explore that part, I'm neglecting, all the whole care of the patients. And at the same time, just kind of talking a little bit about what Dr. Tim was mentioned is that if people that are asking for miracles, if I don't explore what it means to them, what is that miracle, or do everything, at that moment of their life, if I don't explore that relationship with God or what is happening with that, I'm neglecting that part, and I'm really preventing that suffering to, kind of get healed, and obviously even preventing that appropriate grief for the patient and the family through all this process. So I think it's important, definitely, that that education, spiritual education for all the medical or clinical aspect must exist since medical school all the way to residency and also fellowships, just to kind of have some basis. And as we learn about the communication skills, it has to be a communication skill in the sense of the spiritual aspects also, how we handle those how we talk about that part. So definitely it is very important, and avoiding that or neglecting that part will make more suffering of the patients, the families, and obviously we can suffer a lot, for sure.
Oh, yes. Wow. Emptying out in empathy with the patient, with the family, is a power we forget in terms of its limitlessness. The goal is not to do surgery on someone's belief system or their prayer for miracle or their life beliefs. The goal is to come to understand through listening and caring, and as you did in your dialogue, inviting or asking about the individual's soul, pain, about the individual's miracle hope, about the individual's ability or non-ability to say goodbye. And we do that through listening and being present. And my experience is that when I push against someone's belief, they become more rigid and defensive in that belief, to where if I'm with them and come to understand their belief, when that belief is not bringing the result they want, they tend to trust me, trust the physician, trust the social worker more in terms of using them as anchors, if you will, as transition care themselves. The importance of story, and both of you have hit on the story, is hard to measure. Not everyone is quickly open to telling their story. Most people don't tell their story to one who, with ears and eyes and availability, is not present. If they're interrupting, if they're bringing their own specialty too much, if they're talking too much, there's a tendency for them not to share openly with you. And what begins to be expressed from their mouths, as I saw in your dialogue, what begins to be put into words begins to also transcend the individual into new awareness.
Thank you so much for your responses on that question. We have several questions related to the topic I am about to ask you about. So you've all mentioned the importance of family and relationships in this meaning-making process, and the importance of presence. COVID, of course, makes this family presence very difficult. So some of our audience was wondering, how can we accompany those people embarking upon this journey during this time?
Frequently, what we do in chaplaincy is that we may make an initial screening call from the nurse's station to the patient inside the room. Try to get to know them briefly, tell them our role, we're here. If we sense in that there is a need, we ask if we could gown up and come in and visit with them around that need. Whether it's a story that we need to help them tell or a request from them. So the next step would be, as we triage through screening, being with the patient who needs more time and needs my presence more. That could lead to bringing in family through virtual phones and iPads to begin to facilitate that discussion between patient and family, with the hopes that gets deeper and deeper. But it takes time, and if they're not accustomed to that kind of family language, then we need to be careful not to press too hard and making them feel bad for not being able to express certain kinds of love or certain kind of forgiveness or a certain kind of a care, blessing to each other.
I'll just say it's very, very difficult with COVID. With the work I do, as I said, I haven't been able to physically get back onto the campus at MD Anderson since March. I've only had a couple of visits with people through telephone that are Anderson patients. I have worked over the summer with phase 1 clinical trial patients, and that's been through Zoom. And so, again, we're relying on the technologies when we can't be present. And so it definitely is a challenge to work remotely. And so how do you establish that rapport quickly? Because it's all within the first few minutes with the conversation, right? The connection has to happen. And so the more we do it, the better we become at that. But not everybody has the facility with technology, and particularly palliative is such a fragile environment, right? And so it's so delicate, and it just puts, if you're working with a skeleton crew or, a stripped down crew, to put demands on, the caregivers there to then start facilitating extra services, it's just really hard. And I think that that's still being figured out. I'm in a conversation actually in a few weeks with the University of Pennsylvania with their oncology unit and their patient experience team. And it's precisely, this is the conversation we're going to be having, is how can the work I do at Anderson be done remotely through their technology? And we're figuring it out. And so COVID is a game changer, and I don't have all the answers to this. It's very much a work in process.
Is just very quickly, so in the hospital is, as we deal with patients who are in the COVID unit, for example, obviously they are totally isolated, but they have iPad machines and also a computer that allows them to communicate with their loved ones every single day or every single moment. And also all the nurses have the iPads that will communicate with the family just to kind of inform that. And everything is through that care, through the iPad. And believe me, it's kind of even for people who are deteriorating and getting to the point that is not able to interact with you, getting more delirious and everything. What is important also is that many times the nurses are able to grab that iPad, handle it, and put it in front of the patient, so the family also is able to say their goodbyes, and they say they love you, I'm sorry, and everything, So in that sense, kind of complete that aspect of care. And the counselors and the chaplains also are able to provide that care through the iPad or mainly through the iPad there, and to the patient and obviously to the family. Now in the palliative care unit, where the patients, they're not COVID positive, and still we allow to have 1 or 2 members of the family there, so at least there's somebody there with them, so they won't really die by themselves. Yeah. But obviously with the rest of the family that they want to come in, we have the iPads available just to everybody kind of say their goodbyes in the lobby. And we have in place, our counselors and the chaplains there in the palliative care unit. Now in the unit, in the rest of the units, it depends of the availability. Our psychologists and counselors can do also visits through Zoom or through iPads, and the same with the chaplains also. That will be kind of the care that can be coordinated also.
Yes, very important.
Oh, one more thing is that we have a clinic, which is a supportive care clinic that sees patients with advanced illness that are still receiving treatments. So we use Zoom for that one, and we are able to connect right away with the counselor and with the chaplain. So all 3 of us get together and we talk with the patient at that time. So we covered that aspect. The same intent has been doing in the emergency room, where can be done like that. Although it's a little bit harder, but that can be done also.
Yep.
Unless anyone else would like to remark on this question, we have another question from the audience. In all of our panelists' remarks today, we've heard mention of religion and faith as part of the meaning-making process and spiritual growth process. Can you please remark on the spiritual healing of long-term identifying atheists? So what does this journey of spiritual healing look like for someone with, without abandoning their spiritual identity as an atheist?
Well, and I would think I'm supposed to at least speak up on this one. Depends on your base belief. I believe that all persons are gifts and are spiritual beings, yet my role is to accept the other person and come to understand the other person where they are. I have seen, and some Christians will throw me out of here, I have seen some atheists seem to faith into death better than some Christian faith people. And I've walked with them in that journey. But see, my base is different. I believe that they are God's person, if you will. I believe they're a spiritual person, if you will. And I work with them, love them, care with them based on what I think the transcendent is most about, and that is love. And that when you participate in love, you participate in the transcendent. You participate in God. Even though the linguistics, the words, the religious constructs may not be a part of the conversation. You're embodying care, love to them. Not sure I touched the answer, but I hope I'm around it anyway, in it.
And I believe that is definitely for people who do not have any religious aspects or consider themselves agnostic or atheist. Our role, especially whenever they're getting close to the end of life, you know, is always to explore that spirituality that is not religious, but a spirituality as a meaning of life and something that gives them purpose, no? And if they are suffering in that aspect, is try to reconnect with anything. And many people might, about them might say that their family is one of the most important aspects in their lives, and some other people work, some other art, some other music, or some other nature. So something that helps them to connect, especially at those moments, are important to explore, you know, what gives them meaning, without, you know, getting into any religions or anything like that. So I think that might be the main aspect of that. I believe that everybody suffers, you know, independently of you believe or not believe. There are some others that might feel more calm thinking about where they're going. Some others might not even think about it. And but as long it keeps the balance and have that allows them to keep moving through the process of the transcendence, if you want to call it like that, I think it's that's what our role is: being compassionate, being present, and allow them to be comfortable until the end of their lives.
I'll just agree with both of my colleagues here, and I'll just say that in my years of doing this work, no one has ever said to me, and like lying there in the bed or sitting chair, like, I'm an atheist, right? And like, just like, you know, putting that forward and like just entrenching that position as though we're having an academic debate on this. And so I'll just say anecdotally, again, when you go into these rooms in palliative, as far as like normative conversations like you'd have in a classroom or a university or an event like this, all bets are off. All bets are off. In palliative, people have said over 11 years, anything and everything to me. In a way, you become like uninsultable. I don't know, Marvin, if you've had this, right, or Tim, but like you become almost uninsultable because it's not about you in any way. It's about being present to the other person. And so if religion, spirituality, and faith are not on the agenda and they don't bring it up, I don't go there unless they bring it up or unless I sense that it's just under and that it would be remiss not to ask them, you know, is there spirituality that's strong in this family, or what do you think about that? And so wherever the love is, and here I just agree so much with what Tim and Marvin have said, wherever the love is, that's what you go with, and that's what you work with. And then to the extent to which that falls within a theistic or transcendent or theological kind of rubric is not for me to say, it's for the person themselves.
Yeah, I think we have time for just one more question. So our last question from the audience for tonight will be, let's see. Some developmental theorists posit that in old age, we grow more aware of the spiritual, for example, Erickson's theory of transcendence. Do you find that approaching death in older age people is spiritually different or more similar to approaching death in younger people?
I guess I'll start. That's super interesting. What I'll say is the question of spirituality is not, I have not seen it be so different with older populations. The themes that recur within the work that I've seen can come up for any person at any point. With older people, I've found that there's so much more that they have to draw on. So whatever it was that gave them coherence and strength, and whatever that well of love and anchoring is in them, you know, they become more of themselves as time goes on. And so that's what I will tend to hear more of. So it may well be spirituality, or it may be about nature. It may be nature-based in their experiences hiking or doing extreme, you know, climbing while they could, and now it's their garden. or cooking, or being of service and philanthropic service within their community, whatever it is in them, that's what becomes more accentuated, is what I have found.
But what I've noticed in the aged patient is that, along with Erickson's studies, as we begin to look back over our one and only life cycle as a part of what it means to reflect at elder age and even in the dying process. And we see in that life cycle moments of integrity, and yet for most of us also, there are moments of despair, mistake, failure. And that the true insight that Erickson speaks of, and I think the true spirituality we're trying to come to, is wisdom. Wisdom is the capacity to see through things. So that as I walk with the patient, as they explore the integrity and despair events, as they tell the story of integrity and despair over their past, I'm trying to assist them to see through to forgiveness, to grace, to mercy, to love, and particularly to offer those faith dynamics to themselves as I try to offer it in my relationship.
I also believe that is, independently of the age, definitely, well, it's a process of development for sure. And, but at the end, we have seen that the suffering exists, might be a little bit less in elderly patients, but still anxiety, depression, spiritual pain, spiritual distress exists, and the quality of life can be poor. So that's another important aspect that we are trying to really figure out and try to investigate a little bit more, how people, elderly patients, cope in that way, especially at the end of life, and but definitely we have seen that, independent of the age, everybody will suffer in certain degree and might cope in different ways for sure. And I think it's important to explore it in all age ranges.
So unless anyone else has anything to add, I think it's about time for us to wrap up, as it is just about 7:30. So I just wanted to once again express gratitude to our panelists. I can say with complete certainty that I've learned so much tonight, and I really look forward to continuing these conversations with the people I love. And I hope that our audience will have conversations with the people in their lives about what we've discussed tonight, and that they've gained in similar ways. If anyone has further questions on this topic, I'll go ahead and put my email into the chat so you can reach out. And just thank you so much to the audience for coming tonight.